Kevin was used to her always being there and kind of being his right-hand person, and with her focusing on her own career, I think there were strains there. There were a couple of physical altercations in the house, fights that escalated.
Nancy would reach out to Chris whenever she would have a bad night with Kevin, and Chris was her safe haven, you know, where she would go wherever he was at.
Chris was going through problems with his wife at the time, so two people kind of gravitating toward each other because they were, you know, having difficulties.
So I got a call from my husband telling me that Nancy has had some problems and could I help her? I was working in a psychiatrist's office, and Chris brought her in to see me, and she came in and removed her sunglasses, and she had a huge black eye. She told me Kevin had done that to her, and I just told her that I'm help you in any way we can. We need to document this. I was really hoping to try to help her get out of that abusive relationship. I just saw it as being this gonna blow up.
Bash at the Beach was in Daytona Beach at the Ocean Center. It was Kevin Sullivan going against Chris. It was a great match, I thought, because it looked super realistic. And then at one point, Chris and Kevin really started exchanging blows. Chris hit Kevin really hard on the side of the head, and it broke his eardrum. The match ended, but the fight continued backstage. And I was called out to go backstage. I started to walk towards Kevin, and Chris was like, no, don't do that. And Kevin's yelling from the other end of the hallway, come on, come with me, we're leaving. Chris handed me the phone, and it was my sister on the other end. She's like, Sandra, get out of there, come home, come to the condo. Just go with Chris, do not go with Kevin. And I always do what my sister says, so that's what I did. No explanation needed. I went to the condo. My sister came out to talk to me, and she was visibly physically hurt. She explained to me that her injuries were from Kevin, and that Chris had helped her, and that she was leaving Kevin. I told her she had to. Chris was a nice person, and all I knew about him was that he helped my sister in a time that she really needed it. So for that, he instantly had my thanks and my admiration. And she was in love, more in love than I'd ever seen her in my life.
The way they looked at each other, we're like, oh yeah, it's gonna work. And Nancy and I became best of friends.
Chris decided that he wanted to push his career forward a little bit, and then she just really wanted to focus on building the house and starting a family. And then all of a sudden, Daniel was born. I've never seen Chris so beyond himself, just excited.
This is my favorite page because this was during Chris and Nancy's wedding, and Daniel was the best man, of course. This is the love that Chris and Nancy always had. And then here's them feeding Daniel after they got married. And Nancy being the princess that she was. And David was there too, Chris's oldest.
David is the son of Chris Benoit from Chris's first marriage.
Hi guys. Nancy, she treated me like I was her own kid. We didn't use the word step in our family, you know. We were family. We went and had fun, went to Chuck E. Cheese with Daniel and Nancy, and you know, it was good times.
This is my very favorite photo of David and Daniel. It's flippin' adorable. I mean, that's what siblings are. You hang on to one another and hope for the best for each other.
He looked up to me, you know? I loved him. I protected him. We wanted to be tag team champions. That's what we wanted to do. Be the tag team champions of the world together.
So in WCW, there was definitely a ceiling that you would reach.
The bigger guys were getting all the TV spotlights. If you weren't like 7 foot tall and huge muscles, you know, you didn't get the main event.
Chris was getting a little irritated about situation was happening at WCW at the time and never seeing ourselves in a main event spot because we kept getting pushed down. So we decided to take a walk.
I cannot believe this. Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, and Dean Malenko on WWF Raw.
They walked out. WWF picked them up in 1 second, and the rest is history.
And Benoit on top and
When all three of them got to WWE, then you really saw the strengths.
I lie, I cheat, I steal.
Their intelligence for the business and their view of the business and seeing, like, we see this, they saw this. Eddie became one of the best characters of all time, as well as being one of the best in-ring champions. And Benoit became just this killer, no-nonsense Clint Eastwood performer. It was like Dirty Harry. Go ahead, make my day.
Benoit, he's a rabid Wolverine. I'm telling you, Chris Benoit is heartless.
Chris Benoit's been a main eventer for years. It was only the matter that he was too short. Perceived as too short. Imagine that.
Benoit's a magnificent, extraordinary athlete.
I always thought, man, getting Benoit here, it's going to create these great matchups, and it did. It was a no-brainer.
But also, Chris was always very much a great father, very much about his family. His kids were always high up on his list.
When Daniel got a little older, Chris would bring him to the ring. And of course, anytime when Chris brought the kids around, we'd all play with them.
It really pained him when he had to miss certain things. I remember at one point, I said something along the lines of, like, I gotta be home on Halloween. And he's like, oh man, I wish I could go home for Halloween, but I gotta work. And I miss Father's Day too. And I was like, dude, we'll just get those days off. And it's almost like he didn't want to ask for days off because, sacrificing for his art, I guess you would say. And there's a similarity between Chris and Eddie in that both of them sacrificed a lot for their art. Chris and Eddie basically gave their life for pro wrestling.
For Eddie, wrestling was everything. God was first, and then family and wrestling were a close second.
Sometimes we'd be in the locker room and Eddie's naked in the locker room reading scripture to other wrestlers and telling them about God.
Chris wasn't religious at all, and Eddie was the one that started introducing him about God. And Chris was very receptive, and he always listened to Eddie. And Eddie had even given him a Bible one Christmas. And Chris always had that on him, and that was something that meant a lot to Eddie. To always be a witness to Chris, and to help him try to find his higher power.
Chris was very quiet, very reserved, and it took a while for him to trust somebody.
Eddie would be his go-to guide. He'd go and talk to him about certain things, whether it be marriage problems or family or professional problems. They'd always confide in each other, and that's what their friendship was. And I know that Chris didn't have that with a lot of people.
Chris, he was blowing up. He was getting bigger as a wrestler. And to have Nancy behind him, he was really happy. She was the driving force and motivation, sort of taking care of everything else that wasn't related to wrestling. She wanted him to be happy and to be successful and to be with his best friend.
Eddie was injured a lot. He had a lot of pain, a lot of injuries that, he couldn't get operations for.
Eddie Guerrero is legal. It could be over.
And as a wrestler, you never say that you need time off, because as soon as you're off TV for 4 or 6 months, someone else is going to come and replace you. And that was something that was always in Eddie's mind. I was like, I can't stop now.
I think Eddie Guerrero is seriously hurt.
Everything he did was wrestling, even to the point where I know he was in a lot of pain, but he still wanted to wrestle. That's what he does. That's what he did. That's who he was. And there was also a lot of, let's be honest, we're all adults here. We all did the same shit. There's a lot of drinking. There's a lot of drugs.
But the more that Eddie was trying to hide his injuries with the drugs and the alcohol, it was just getting into a downward spiral.
I saw Chris several different times and make sure that Eddie was tucked in bed okay, and put on his side so he wouldn't throw up on himself. But then Eddie started getting DUIs, and crashing his car, and, having overdose problems.
There was 3 ODs that Eddie did in our house. The first 2, I called the ambulance. And all they did was release him the next afternoon. They just sent him home. The third time, I just let him lay there. I actually left and took the girls to school and just told God, if you're gonna take him, just take him now, because it was a bad place in my life.
A lot of wrestlers were dying from substance abuse issues, and in the back of your mind, always you're like, man, is Eddie gonna be one of those? Is he gonna be a statistic?
Eddie showed up to work high one day where he was in bad shape, and I think that when they saw that and Eddie couldn't perform, that's when they said, we're gonna go ahead and let you go. He called me and said, well, I got fired. I finally was like, oh, well, thank God. I mean, because now the worst that could ever be imagined is happening.
They sent him to rehab, lost everything, and had to go from the depths of hell and work his way up the system again.
Little by little, he started changing his life to get clean.
After that, his wife came back, his family came back, his life came back.
And that's where Eddie got rehired from WWE, and things were great. He was in the best shape.
WrestleMania 20, the fans knew the history of Eddie and Chris. So the night in New York, it's the right time for both of these guys.
Me and Nancy were watching from the skybox. We were jittery and we were nervous and we were excited and we were stressed too, because we didn't know, if they were gonna win or what the outcome was.
Just happened. Wait a minute. The boom went flying. Boom came off. Look at this. Swap package. 1, 2, 3.
When Eddie won, it was pure joy.
Benoit going up to the top.
See my dad in the ring? He was my hero. I remember it like yesterday, man. Jumped up after he won the belt.
Nancy and I were crying and the girls were excited. And of course you see the confetti and all the fans just on their feet.
And then I got to see Eddie Guerrero go out there, best friend. What a moment. I'll never forget that.
And that's why that's one of the best moments in not just wrestling history, and I think TV history. It was the happy storybook ending of WrestleMania.
Thank God the office finally saw those guys for what they were.
It was my favorite time, my favorite match. I wish those two just retired right after that, to be honest with you.
I have never, ever seen a closer relationship or friendship between two wrestlers as I did between Chris and Eddie. It was an actual, real, no bullshit, out of the ring, caring relationship.
So there's a super show in Minneapolis. We got a flight to Minneapolis. It's a few hours. So Eddie's sitting there talking to me, and then he kind of passes out, sleeps. And I'm like, well, I didn't know that this had been happening to Eddie. He started talking to people and passed out in the middle of a sentence. So we get off the plane in Minneapolis, check into our hotel that we always go to, and we had seen Chris in the lobby also. Say, I'll see you down in the morning. Okay. 7 o'clock, and we're gonna go work out. It's set. 3 of us together, that's the way it was. Eddie goes to his room, I go to my room. Next morning, I get a call about 5:30. It's the front desk. Something's wrong with your uncle. Something's wrong with my uncle. So I get a knock on my door, security guard, and he's taking me into Eddie's room. I go, what's going on? He goes, well, your uncle didn't answer his wake-up call. So we came to his room and knocked, no answer. With the latch on, that means someone's in here. So they cut the latch off. I walk in and I look in the bathroom, I see Eddie face down. He's in his underwear, his toothbrush was in his hand. I grab him, I kind of try to shake him, and he's moving, and I hear him gurgling, like, and I'm like, Eddie, wiping his face, and he's like, he's still there, man, and we're trying, and then all of a sudden, he's in my arms, and he's not there anymore. He passed in in my arms, like literally.